The beginning of the show, Truth and Reason, I talked about Bob Nightengale. You know, these guys, these national guys, they think they have a scoop. He's talking about Lindor being traded by the deadline, by the opening day. We've been talking about it for 3 years here, and all of a sudden he thinks he's got a scoop. I'm sure he's a nice man, a great writer, but this is no scoop it's a scoop situation.
Yeah, you're right. Bob Nightengale, really good guy. I've met him, spoken with him, quality dude, and does great work, but he didn't scoop anybody in Northeast Ohio, anybody who's been paying attention. Even, baseball observers around the country, all they had to do was look at what the Indians are doing with their payroll and recognize that there's no way that Frankie Lindor was going to get paid upwards of $20 million to play baseball for the Indians next year, which would be his last year under control.
All right, so let me ask you this. We saw him in a bad year this past year, especially in the clutch in the postseason. He hasn't performed well in the postseason. I'm not trying to put him down because I wish we had him for the next 10 years. But is he still a top 10 player in the major leagues right now?
I guess. I hesitate because, like you just said, Les, that this year kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. I know it was only a 60-game sprint and whatnot, but he didn't look right. He just didn't look like he was engaged, and he really didn't play that well. You can only think of a few games here or there where he, quote-unquote, carried the team. His defense was above average to excellent, but the offense was lagging, and his agents are going to have to sell him as a superstar who just had an off year, and so are the Indians, by the way, because he's not a free agent. The key, though, is the Indians have to find a suitor that is not just going to acquire him in a trade, but will sign him long term. You're not going to acquire Lindor for a 1-year run, I don't think. I mean, especially if the Indians are asking for a lot. So the team that acquires him more than likely is going to need to have the cash to sign him. And even with his off year in 2020, I still think he will command a total contract of north of $300 million.
Okay, but a couple of other things have come up since then. You've got the COVID, which has changed the game of baseball and may have changed it forever. And you've got, what is he? He's not a power hitter. He's a great defensive player. He's a good average hitter. Hitting for average. But his days of 30, you think he's a 30 home run guy again?
I do, because he's still young, relatively speaking. Certainly in world terms, but also in baseball terms, he's still young. You can argue, that he's entering his prime. So I think he's capable of 30 home runs. Again, I think he's capable of a dynamic offense. But it is tricky, Les. This year is very not only was 2020 convoluted and crazy with the COVID, but going into 2021, there's no guarantees that there are going to be fans in the stands. So, and teams are strapped for revenue in general coming off of this year. So the team that acquires him and signs him to a big deal, or plans to sign him to a big deal, has got to hope that, the revenue stream is wide open sooner than later.
All right, so you got Francisco Lindor, and we all love the guy, or we love the guy that we saw up until last year. But as he gets ready to go to the next step or the next level, what does he do? If you say he was a different person or a changed player, which I agree with, by the way, and he lost something, I don't know what or how, but he wasn't the same player physically or mentally out there last year. So what was it from? Did he wake up one day and say, "Wait a minute, I just went down $200 million"? Did I say the wrong thing at a press conference? Do I have the wrong agent? All these different things, and you wonder if he's now thinking he might have cost himself some big money.
It could be a combination of factors. I don't know Frankie Lindor. I've never spoken one-on-one to Frankie Lindor. So I am not, capable of figuring out what's in his head. But if I were in his position, Les, let me just say that. If I were in his position going into 2020 and knowing that it was a COVID season, knowing that the players and owners hadn't come to an agreement, so it was a commissioner-imposed 60-game run, worrying about potentially getting COVID, also having the prospect of my monster contract hanging over my head, I think it would be a distraction, a tangible distraction to the point where maybe I wasn't as locked in mentally and psychologically as I needed to be when I came to the ballpark every day. Because, he might have looked around at some other guys like Anthony Rendon, Manny Machado, Bryce Harper, Mike Trout, and said, you know what, these guys, Nolan Arenado, they got their money. Well, here I am. I'm next in line or close to next in line, and I haven't gotten my money yet. So I have to figure out a way to impress in a COVID season. And another guy I should have mentioned, Les, Mookie Betts.
Yeah.
Add that as a factor, I think, in perhaps Lindor being a little distracted. Because imagine this. You're Frankie Lindor, and you know that the Indians had talked with teams, specifically the Dodgers, about moving you to LA before the 2020 season. And you realize the Indians backed away because they wanted more than the Dodgers were willing to give. So what happens next? The Dodgers say, okay, thanks for the phone calls and the emails and the texts. We're moving on to the Boston Red Sox, and we are acquiring Mookie Betts and giving him the Frankie Lindor money. So if you're Lindor, you're watching that happen in the offseason, you're going, man, I could have been the shortstop of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And the salt in the wound gets doubled when you watch what the Dodgers did this year. And they won the World Series. And guess what, Les? The NLCS MVP and the World Series MVP was Corey Seager, the guy you were supposed to replace in LA.
Yeah.